back to the rundown. Now, early in the program, we just spoke about Israel's latest signs of normalizing ties with the Gulf states. That's after Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that Israel and the United Arab Emirates will be launching a partnership in the fight against coronavirus. Well, for more on that, I'm joined from New York by Rabbi Marc Schneier. He also serves as a special advisor to the King of Bahrain and has been involved in these unofficial diplomatic efforts to bridge the gap between the Gulf states and Israel. Thanks for joining us, Rabbi Schneier. Now, we know, of course, as I mentioned, much of that sort of diplomacy happens under the radar, but it really came out of the blue today, this announcement about the UAE partnering with Israel. And perhaps just fill us in a bit, if you can. It really indicates how much discussion and contacts have been taking place out of the public eye, for example, between the UAE and Israel.
Well, I think it also points to how far we've come. I question your statement in terms of how much is under the radar. Each of the Gulf states is trying to find a different path to warm relations with Israel. It's just 1 year ago that Bahrain hosted the historic Peace to Prosperity Conference. You've had Qatar for several years now, very publicly providing humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza at the request of the Israelis. You had Oman a few years back hosting Prime Minister Netanyahu. So I believe that each of the Gulf states is trying to find their path in terms of warming relations between the Gulf and Israel.
Right. Now, what's unusual about this announcement, though, is somewhat the timing of it, because it really comes just something like a week or days after that opinion piece published, of course, here in Israel as well, by the UAE ambassador to the U.S., urging Israel not to move ahead with its annexation plans, but at the same time saying that if it did, that could jeopardize or freeze any move towards normalization. So the timing of these two announcements, is it coincidental, or is there maybe some kind of message here in the timing, perhaps from the UAE?
Nothing in the Middle East is coincidental. I believe that there is a very important message here in terms of what is at stake if the Prime Minister and the Israeli government proceed with the annexation. Many view that any movement in that direction would be pouring cold water on the warming of relations. An example being in terms of what the Prime Minister in UAE announced today. So I don't believe that anything here is coincidental. And this is just one more example of how far Israel and the Gulf can go if we continue on the path to peace and at the same time looking for ways to cooperate and to bring Israel and the Gulf together.
Now, there has been some suggestion, Rabbi, that if Israel would not proceed with the annexation, there would have to be some, or maybe the White House, the U.S. could arrange some kind of compensation for that. There's been some, I don't know if they're based on actual reports, but theories put out, perhaps a non-belligerence pact with, for example, the UAE. Is that a likely scenario that you see happening?
I think a likely scenario that I see happening, and I actually predicted this on your program 2 years ago, that we will see the establishment of relations between Israel and the Gulf. And over these past several years, we've seen example after example, whether it's the UAE, whether it's Qatar, Bahrain, and others, in terms of moving in that direction. In terms of cooperation between UAE and Israel in combating COVID-19, this is just one more example of an issue that transcends ideological, political differences. All parties still have to cope with the existentialist threat coming from Iran. And today we have another existentialist threat, and that is, how do we fight? How do we combat COVID-19? and bringing Israel and the Gulf together and using the resources and the brain trust, they can not only be at the forefront of finding the cure and the vaccine, but what a paradigm for the greater world as well.
Right. But of course, Rabbi, you know Israel well, as you know the Gulf, and you know the political realities at play here, for example, for Prime Minister Netanyahu. I wonder if you think there is some kind of measure of annexation that the Israeli government can move toward while still maintain that process of normalization with the Gulf states that you've been talking about.
Look, my friend, I tend not to pay attention to noise. I look at the facts. And today is an historic announcement of cooperation. It's historic for Israel and the UAE, as it has been historic these past several years between Israel and other Gulf states. Clearly, that's the path, that's the journey. It doesn't mean that we don't have hurdles along the way. There could be different self-interests and other agendas. But the good news is that we are on the march. We're on the journey to the promised land of Gulf-Israel cooperation. And today's announcement is yet one more benchmark along that journey.
All right, well, we will see how the developments here in Israel may or may not affect that march, as you describe it, in the coming weeks. Rabbi Marc Schneier from New York City, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.